Mission San Luis, the beginnings of Spanish presence in La Florida. Life before Mission San Luis for the Native Americans was a life of simplicity. They depended on hunting game and gathering wild plants for food. Eventually, they improved their tactics and grew their own food. They played games and congregated as a community often. They were very skilled architects, but their homes were quite simple. An Appalachian house was described in 1675 as a small, round, and made of thatch with a low, narrow doorway and no windows. The Appalachian Civic Center was the place where business was usually held. An actor, Malina, will explain the significance of this center.
All right, well, welcome to the Council House. This is the main building for the Appalachian Native peoples in this area, so they'll have one major building in every major town, and it's a multi-purpose building. So this is where the chief and his council will meet. This is where you'll have ceremonial fires. The fire represents the spirit of their ancestors, so there's a lot of ceremonial dancing, there's other celebrations and rituals in this space. And then travelers can stay the night in here too, where they can stay for free and get fed for free. So nobody lives here, but it would be a very bustling, busy, smoky place to be.
The Appalachians were a matrilineal society. Inheritance and authority were passed down through the mother's family. Women did most of the farming, gathering of food, and food preparation. Men hunted wild game, fought in wars, and assisted maintaining the villages and caring for children. Children worked alongside the adults, learning skills needed for everyday life. Like most explorers, dreams of riches like gold and silver lured Panfilo de Narvaez in 1528 and Hernando de Soto in 1539 to seek their fortunes throughout the southeastern regions of La Florida. Native peoples in Tampa told these explorers that riches could be found in the Appalachian province, which is now modern-day Tallahassee. The De Soto expedition was the first to camp in modern-day Tallahassee. With the Spaniards came priests who attempted to convert the natives. They failed, but succeeded in spreading diseases and germs that killed thousands of natives. Despite this epidemic, the Spanish had a strong relationship with the Appalachians, which led to the founding of a mission. The origin of Mission San Luis is much like the origin of any mission. Its creation was based solely on the conversion to Christianity. Before converting to Christianity, the Native Americans worshipped gods representing natural forces that guided the Appalachian religious beliefs and worship ceremonies. The sun, moon, rain, and thunder were thought to be divine, since these were needed for growing food. Platform mounds and plazas were where religious, cultural ceremonies were generally conducted. In 1607, some Appalachian Indians asked for Catholic friars to minister among the native peoples. By 1633, two Franciscan friars, Pedro Munoz and Francisco Martinez, founded the first two permanent missions in the province, and 5 years later, the first Spanish soldiers arrived. San Luis, originally named San Luis de Jayza, was probably among the first missions to be founded. The King of Spain and the Catholic Church ruled Spanish settlements throughout its empire. Both government and religion increased power by collecting a great wealth from Spain's many colonies worldwide and converting the natives of those lands to the Catholic faith. Spanish society showed little to no religious tolerance to those who were not Catholics. Religious missionaries to Spain's colonies taught the Christian faith and maintained the people's loyalty to the king. During Florida's first Spanish colonial era, from 1513 to 1763, Catholic friars and priests founded over 100 missions in the southeast region of North America. There are 12 crosses posted along Mission San Luis. Both Spain and England participated in the slave trade of Native Americans and Africans to supplement their colonial labor forces. However, the Spanish government did not allow Florida Indians to be slaves, as was the law and practice in other Spanish colonies. Florida's governors and its religious leaders allowed the Hispanic colonists to force Indians to work for little or no wages. Many natives were badly treated, poorly fed, and died of forced labor. Much of St. Augustine was built by forced Indian labor. Slaves were present in Florida, though not as many as England's Carolina colony, where there were twice as many Africans as whites. Spanish law derived from ancient Rome and treated slaves and women differently than English common law. Spanish law recognized slaves as unfortunate persons who still had legal rights, could sue their owners in court, and could own property. Both men and women slaves could petition the Spanish king. The law allowed for slaves to purchase their freedom and attain rights for all the king's free subjects. In Florida, the Spanish government granted freedom to escaped slaves from England's American colonies if they converted to the Catholic faith and served in the colonial military. St. Augustine had a free African settlement nearby, the first free black community in North America. Black slaves who escaped from the English colonies north of Spanish Florida settled together at Fort Mose. The men formed an armed militia to defend their families from English slave raids. In short, Fort Mose was a product of African-born slaves risking their lives to escape English plantations in Carolina and find freedom among the Spanish living in St. Augustine. Fort Mose became the first legally sanctioned free black town in present-day United States. An actor at Mission San Luis was interviewed and allowed me to write his words, and he just asked that his information be disclosed. The question was, what is the relationship between Mission San Luis and African slaves? Explain how Mission San Luis is linked to Fort Mose. His response was, Mission San Luis is linked to African slaves simply because many African slaves were sent to Mission San Luis to live and help the community flourish once they accepted Christianity as a faith. Many slaves were running away from St. Augustine to be free. Truthfully, conditions were not much better, but they were free. Most of these freed slaves went to Fort Mose, but a few resided at Mission San Luis. That is how Mission San Luis is linked to Fort Mose. Okay, so this is the fort at Mission San Luis. From the 1650s, when San Luis was first established, its military garrison had some type of casa fuerte or blockhouse. However, a full-scale fort was not constructed until the 1690s when the threat of an English attack became imminent. The number of Spanish soldiers stationed at San Luis ranged from 12 to 45. There were also an unknown number of reformados or civilians who remained on call in the event of a military strike. Appalachian militias provided the bulk of the province's military power. Appalachia received training and use of firearms from Spaniards. They served as sentries, some held military titles, and they always outnumbered Spanish soldiers on raids. An actor at Mission San Luis gives more details on the facts of the fort.
Region or station from. This is where you're storing all your supplies that you're going to need in case of a siege. So a lot of food in here. Food to be able to feed several hundred people for months at a time. And, that's the basics of the fort.
The fort was composed of a palisade, a bastion, a firing platform, a blockhouse, the main gate, and the dry moat. After the completion of the new two-story blockhouse in the 1690s, it was surrounded by a dry moat filled with cactus. In 1687, English slaves began running away from Carolina plantations to seek freedom in St. Augustine. Spanish King Carlos II granted slaves freedom, provided they became Catholics and obedient subjects. Even though the Spaniards practiced slavery, the king had a practical reason for freeing African slaves in 1693. The Florida colony received new settlers while the English colony had fewer residents. This practical act of humanity caused feelings between Spain and England to grow worse. The English slave owners demanded the return of their property. Spain did not do so. In 1701, England declared war on Spain and France. Historians named it Queen Anne's War. Battles between American colonies in Florida and Carolina nearly wiped out the Indians of Spanish Florida and southern Georgia and destroyed Spain's network of over 100 missions. Mission San Luis was the best protected village beyond St. Augustine, and the English militiamen did not attack right away. But by July 31st, 1704, the English had marched very near Mission San Luis. Rather than allow the fort to be captured, the Spanish and Appalachian villagers burned all the buildings and fled. Thank you for watching our informational video on the historic site in Tallahassee, Florida, Mission San Luis.